Stay up to date on the latest political news this election season for less. Visit inforum.news/port and get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Subscribe now at inforum.news/port. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Forum Communications Company is proud to be a part of the Trust Project. Learn more at thetrustproject.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. We have another debate. Like a couple of weeks ago, we did Public Service Commission debate. We've done a debate in the U.S. House race. We've done a debate in the Attorney General's race. Next week, we'll be doing a debate in the Secretary of State's race. But today, it's the Agriculture Commissioner race. And the incumbent Ag Commissioner is Doug Goehring. He's been there for a while. He was first appointed to the job in 2009 by then Governor John Hoeven. He was elected in his own right in 2010 with 69.98% of the vote, in 2015 with 56.9% of the vote, and for the last time in 2018 with 67.8% of the vote. He's now running here in 2022 for another 4 years on the job, and his challenger is Democratic-NPL endorsed candidate Fintan Dooley. Fintan's passed the bar. He's an attorney. He passed the bar and founded his law firm in North Dakota in 1976. He works in the area of law related to industry and the environment and agriculture, oil and gas, and also has had a very specific focus on saltwater spills. So these two candidates are here with us today, and we're just going to start asking questions. By the way, also co-hosting with me is Jamie Selzer. He's a former executive director of the Democratic NPL, North Dakota Democratic-NPL, and obviously a longtime observer and participant in North Dakota politics. And I'm just going to get right off, and I'm going to start with the incumbent. Doug, why should North Dakotans give you another 4 years?
Well, that's a great question. I believe that there's a lot of good work that has been done. There's a lot more work to be done. Agriculture is our number one industry in the state. We produce 54 different commodities commercially. We've expanded our footprint. I remember coming into this job, we traded with a few countries. It really wasn't well defined. I remember also when I was with United Soybean Board and doing international marketing, a lot of our products were being sold around the world, or likely those were our products. And yet, because they were being processed in Arizona or in California, they took claim to fame for them, and that was unfortunate. We had an opportunity. Since then, we've really built the business. We're exporting in 157 different countries, and our export market and our footprint around the globe has changed dramatically. We have 60 food export companies, and we have 47 bean processing companies, and we have numerous other companies that have really taken an interest and have moved a lot more goods into that market. The other areas that I identify is that our ability to utilize technology and to look at creating efficiencies and developing more on the bottom line for farmers and ranchers is of the utmost importance. So I really feel there's a lot of different areas we could touch on, whether it's exports, research, whether we're looking at technology, precision agriculture. All those things help further the cause. And there's just so many good areas to continue to work on, whether we're battling the government on over-regulation or whether we're pushing back on certain WOTUS rules, for example, that want to encumber, harm, hinder, and really threaten private property rights in North Dakota and across the United States.
So same question, Fintan, for you. Well, I guess it's not the same question because you're not the incumbent, but interesting thing, Fintan, is I've actually heard you praise Doug Goehring. You said he's doing a great job. So I guess the question for me is you're obviously presenting yourself as another choice for North Dakota voters on the ballot. Why you and not Doug Goehring? Why should you have a 4-year term and not him?
Well, I'm old enough to have a realism about life. I've listened to this recitation. I've studied his recitation. Mr. Goehring's recitation, the incumbent, has actually accomplished what he said he's accomplished. And so I want to say what I said to him at Mayville not long ago. Do you remember our link? And surely he does. He said so. And I commended him there to undertake a fresh start in the very important arena of the collision of the oil patch, farming, ranching, and our wetlands. And I really mean it. By looking at the website, listening to him, and actually hunting on his own land. This guy actually allowed me to hunt on his land. So I have to reiterate that he is going to win and that he should win, but he should undertake to be the art link of the oil patch. Our oil patch has manifested bad decisions by Democrats for 70 years. It's not my purpose to sue the oil companies. It's not my purpose to injure anybody's career. The reason we have prosperity in our state is because coal has been well managed, oil industry can be better managed, and then we can all drive our big pickups and not feel guilty. So my purpose, I want it real clear, my purpose is to beckon Mr. Goehring to allow me and others who know the oil patch, know its problems, know its need to be shut down. Many of these wells are a great offense to the communities. They're a great offense to the productivity of our land. And it's time we have big data capability to find, sort, and fix these lands. And I'd like to convince Doug Goehring that the practice of the Industrial Commission violates North Dakota's Constitution. It doesn't allow due process. The purpose and design of it is to do a quick closure of the state's liability. It's a shame and it's wrong, and we should revisit every failed dig and haul and redo it. It'll bring life. It'll bring a confidence to our farming that the state really will listen finally. So I'm here to politely insist that we can do it better. And I'd like to have Doug Goehring join me and some of the most preeminent scientists in North America, actually several of them hired by the state of North Dakota. We're going to do a tour October 6th, start at Renville Corners, and we're going to look at problem sites that say that the real truth is we have vast acres that are impaired and they're dead lands and they can be brought to life. And it's much, much more than Mr. Goehring has said, much, much more. And I just ask that you, Rob, and you, Selzer, come along. We should begin to look at this thing again. It'll bring prosperity, restore productivity. Nobody's reputation needs to be harmed. We have the right moment, the right science, and we can start. It will require substantial investment from our legacy fund.
Well,
we should call the legacy fund the Oil Industry Legacy Restoration Fund.
There's a lot there to unpack, and I want to give the incumbent a chance to respond to some of that. Doug, for people who maybe don't know, one of the jobs of the Agriculture Commission, or one of the most important jobs, is to sit on what's called the State Industrial Commission. He sits on that commission along with the governor, along with the attorney general, and part of their job is to regulate the oil and gas industry. And so that's the context in which Fintan was making some of his comments. Doug, do you want to respond to some of that?
Well, I can, and I know it's a little difficult without having it in the proper context. So I don't want to actually throw everything out that Fintan has made reference to without understanding what's behind some of it. And I don't want to speak for him either. But I would say that I know the issue has been brought up that we have all of these lands that are tainted or there's a problem that exists out there. And we've recognized for a long time, in fact, shortly after I came into office, I went and visited some of these places and came back and visited with Lynn Helms, and we worked in the 2012 legislative session, or I guess it'd be 2011, started asking questions about our ability to tap the OBSERV fund, which would allow us to do some research on some of these areas. Now, to probably put it into the right context, practices that took place in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s were practices approved by EPA. No one knew any different. And what they would do is drill, or they would dig a reserve pit. And then when they are drilling, all their mud, all of their water, everything went into that pit. And they would just wait for it to evaporate. And at some point when they were done, then they would just close the pit up. Hopefully everything evaporated. The problem was, keep in mind, all over, under all of this geology in North Dakota, in the world, where most oil and gas reserves are, there's also salt water. So that salt water comes up when it's being produced and when you're drilling, and that ends up in this pit. Those pits were covered, and then a lot of the sites, well, not all of them, but some wells remained and continued to produce over time. Then we had some that went into TA status, which is a whole nother issue that we had to deal with eventually. What happened was we went to the legislature, and we did ultimately, I believe it was in 2013, got an appropriation to start to do some research out on some of these places. And here's the deal. Land is like people. Soil has a different personality. The topography, everything about it, how much moisture it receives, what were the management techniques, all those things dictate how that soil is going to respond. We couldn't just go in and do a dig and haul, as Fintan pointed out. That isn't always the best thing to do. But there are some different techniques, practices, and systems you can put in place. We had to start exploring what are some of the best practices, what are some of the things we can do to start to correct some of these areas. Keep in mind, it was a wrong practice that EPA approved, and we adopted over all those years. That was the best science at the time. It's kind of like having the speed limit change on the interstate. Okay, so if you're driving a different speed limit now than you did before, does that mean you go back and ticket and everybody who violated the speed now? I mean, you can't go back and do that. So what we've done is we've asked for the funds to do the research, and we've started some research projects. And we've been working through those things. In 2016, we actually were able to do inventory on how many wells are out there, how many well sites, and what we would need to correct how many acres. So there are 105 well sites. There are 52 acres that we intend to work on, continue to work on, and try to find the best possible solution of correcting and remediating the problem out there. Now, I do know, and I've heard that while there's thousands of acres and there's many wells, we have a lot of places in North Dakota along the north and the central and the eastern part where we have alkali or salt soils, sodic soils. People call them various things. And we have wetlands that contribute to that. We have soils that in general have problems. We have some farming practices that actually contribute to that. And I'm not indicating or suggesting that there's bad farming practices going on where some of these places are being cited, but continuing to add fertilizer to an area that continues to grow when you have excessive moisture, because it's excessive moisture that brings this up, causes the seep. And if you're not correcting that, you're not tiling it, you're going to continue to have a problem. And it may not even be anything associated with previous activity there from oil and gas production. So it's just not to be disingenuous. We need to be careful about everything we look at, how we manage it. I know during COVID, we had some of our projects shut down. I've been assured that last year they started some work again. This spring they're up and going, and we will have to take this case by case, issue by issue, and deal with these 105 sites that we have in our system as we continue to get appropriations and the authority from the legislature to do this type of work.
Right. Thanks, Doug. Fintan, I have a question for you. Now, I think we're going to want to generally stay connected to issues because there are producers out there who are probably really curious, but I just have like one quick political question for you, Fintan. I think it's good to be realistic about what someone's chances are in the November election. I think sometimes we sort of kid ourselves about who can win and who can't win. But I've been involved in North Dakota politics. My first statewide campaign was 1994. And I think you today are the first time I've heard a statewide candidate from a major party say that people should vote for the other person. And I guess I'm curious why I get why you're running, because you care about some issues that you want Doug and others to talk about. But why would you take a spot on a ballot and rather than give people an actual choice between two candidates, you're basically taking a spot and saying, you only have one choice because I'm telling you to vote for the other guy. I'm curious, I guess as someone who's been involved in politics a long time, I sort of have some concerns about that. So maybe you can address that for me.
Well, sure. The era I grew up in lived on the fantasy generated by pot. I'm not smoking any pot in this election. The real problem is how serious, how honest we are about the acres and acres of land that are adversely impacted. Mr. Goehring, and I give him credit for acknowledging part of the problem, he has squarely misstated the cause of this problem. The cause of this problem was not the EPA. And I reference a study by the American Petroleum Institute that was completed in 1932. These oil companies that came here were warned in 1932 not to do what they did here. It was not approved by the EPA. These unlined pits was not approved by the EPA. It was a decision that was acceptable. It was low cost. The oil industry was dealing with legislators who would do anything for a job. So the answer is, why do I do this? The answer is that we need to educate people that we have violated people's property rights. The deference, the lean over and give them whatever they want attitude of Democrats and Republicans on the Industrial Commission is a source of the problem. But it's not my intent to go after the dead. It's not my intent to go after the folks that hauled money out of the state and laughed as they left because they didn't have to pay the cost that they were told about in 1932. Furthermore, now why would a pro-life Democrat, expecting the rough treatment that's been given to Mark Haugen, even put his name out? Well, the answer is nobody else in Minot was willing to do it. The Attorney General candidate wasn't even there. I mean, this Democratic Party needs a captive breeding program. I showed up as some person that was finally convinced by Marv Nelson, one of the most insightful people. By the way, he squarely disagrees with much of what Mr. Goehring has said about the extent of this, and so do I. So I came into this matter thinking, I am going to inform the state of its own liability. I'm going to tell the good science, and we can learn the good science. We can share that insight and deal with this problem honestly. There has been no honesty about this matter. It has been a blindness. It has been a plugged ears. It's been a desire to be on the cheap. I'm faulting the state with condemning property, surface acres. Every single commissioner has occasioned the creation of unpermitted solid waste disposal sites, and the state is liable. And these peanuts that have been thrown out to fix lands have not even been used in many occasions. I'm here to drill down on one important point, and that is the state's at fault, the state's got the money, and the state has to start over. And if I can persuade Mr. Goehring and you folks to come out, you'll see that it's not rocket science. It is not true that we need research. What we need is we need to identify the extent of these sites, and we can. Fuji Wang and Steve Applebaum, hired by the Salt Contaminated Land Council, actually made maps of the worst salinization in the Nagasaki, Hiroshima part of Bottineau County. Bentic, Sherman, Wiley, these 4 townships have maps. We should locate the salinated naturally and oil industry and the overlap. Some of the remedies will work on the native and ag-caused salinization. We do not need more research. We need more money. We need to be honest, and we can no longer go on with these quick whim-wham dig and haul. Let me tell you that dig and haul, as practiced by the Industrial Commission, does not even look for off-site leaching. An absolutely immoral decision, because Ed Murphy, the state geologist, tells us sodium chloride leaches. It goes out and it goes deep. Yet our dig and haul, as practiced and proposed by this Industrial Commission, goes in and cuts out a little snip, and it leaves to the contractor the decision of whether or not they should go off-site. These contractors want to make money. The Department of Mineral Resources doesn't even have an agronomist. I mean, it's absolutely horrible to think that they're sending out contractors to decide the extent of the reclamation. And this thing is perfused with failure to tell the truth. I'm here to tell you that it can be redone. Every single failed site ought to be revisited. Don't blame anybody. The focus is on restoring productivity. And we prepared a litigation against the state for its taking of these surface acres. We didn't file it. COVID hit. But the state is headed for, if the state won't do it honestly, some young person will take this on. It's a constitutional proposition. Our state constitution, Article 1, Section 16, and all the cases cited thereon stand for the proposition that the state has adversely condemned private property. I don't want a lawsuit. I'm 77. I'd like to die knowing that honest reclamation is occurring. What is going on now is dishonest. It has been, and it's got to stop.
Let's move on, Commissioner Goehring, to a different issue, something that's made the headlines quite a bit, and really even more than the headlines. There's billboards running here in Minot about them, where I live. Is about the bill, obviously Microsoft billionaire Bill Gates buying up some farmland here in North Dakota. That has set off a lot of people upset about it, because they think that Bill Gates is trying to control the food supply. They think that China is trying to control somehow China, I've seen, is insinuated in there. There's also been controversy over whether or not that land sale violated North Dakota's corporate farming ban. Now, that was more a question for the Attorney General, but you started out this debate saying that agriculture is North Dakota's most important industry. I 100% agree with you. Tell us a little bit about your reflections and what you've heard from farmers about that Bill Gates land purchase.
Yeah, well, and for the most part, I'll tell you, whether it came from communities, whether it came from farmers and ranchers, the industry, I think the biggest contention in all this has been the fact that Bill Gates has been adversarial toward agriculture and towards animal agriculture. He has not been a fan, and he's not been a friend. So more people have been taking issue with that he's buying land. Now, some people think he's trying to lock up the land so he can farm it and control food prices. Folks, just to keep in mind, there are almost 40 million acres in North Dakota that are used for production agriculture. And when you look across the United States, you have 600 million acres. So the 277,000, I believe, that he owns in the United States isn't even decimal dust and all that. But to that end, people take issue with someone buying agriculture land and then being so adversarial towards agriculture itself. I will credit him this. He did do an agreement with the Campbell brothers to put it back into production agriculture, which is good.
Well, my understanding was the Campbell brothers sold him the land and then reached an agreement with him to continue farming that land. Is that was
exactly
my understanding? Okay.
And I think the other thing that people have they've screamed into the phone at me about is, can't you do something about this? Because, that land would have brought more at public auction. Well, that may be true, but the reality is in the United States of America, you have the right, it's a private property right, to do with your land what you wish, as long as it's not illegal. Now, I'll tell you something even more egregious that I have found out over this period of time. And although it's disappointing that Bill Gates is here buying farmland, do you know how many sellers we have that are selling land to people from Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa? And those people come into our state, they buy up the land, and then they take it out of production. They won't allow any more cows on it, and they won't allow any more farming because they want it for recreational purposes or for hunting. And talk about something egregious and damaging in our state. I mean, that's as egregious and damaging as selling land to Bill Gates, who may or may not allow it to go into production agriculture. But this is a growing problem in North Dakota, and we all need to be mindful of it. Now, you still have a right to do what you want with your land as long as it's lawful. But people, be mindful of your neighbors, be mindful of your community, be mindful of our industry, because this really is damaging when you continue to see that the best deal, the best buy in the United States of America is North Dakota land. And then we're going to buy it and park it so someone can come here and enjoy the skies, enjoy the wildlife, enjoy their little piece of heaven. And it will continue to erode away and destroy what we have as a farming and ranching community here in North Dakota.
Fintan, your thoughts?
I'm not so kind he has been to Bill Gates. I think this is be trite. This is the elephant's nose under the tent. I think he's properly characterized the bigger wrong, however, and that is that people come in and buy land wanting to create their own, I guess you'd say, United Nations biosphere. We're here to raise food and fiber and help people heat their homes. Getting back to the Attorney General, I fault the Attorney General for failing to actually get a copy of the Bill Gates Trust. Long before he bought land here, he was buying land, and I believe he has a real estate investment trust, and I do not believe that real estate investment trust is compliant with law. And I believe the Attorney General has failed to get the document, and he's defaulted to doing his duty. In addition to the purchase of land by hunter groups or maybe that's probably the major purchase of hunter groups. I'm offended that there's so little respect for the starting farmer. I sat in Buxton, North Dakota. You ought to go to Buxton. You're sitting on what is the best land, according to soil science. It's the best land in Red River Valley, and it's likely then the best land in the world. When I sat there with a group of farmers, one of them was a very disturbed young man who lost another bid. So what we're seeing is an unrestrained run the score up, run the tally up, and it's squeezing out young farmers. I think it's a moral issue, and I hope that there's something can be done to require greater involvement of the individual, and that might even apply to dentists and surgeons and lawyers who buy land. And if you're buying it for the appreciation of land, are you really a farmer? I don't think that's a sufficient involvement. I am, however, in favor of defining certain aspects of farming to allow corporate activities. The farming enterprise, the dairy, can be actually sold if the next generation doesn't want to do it. But to summarize, our Attorney General has not done his duty. He has not investigated, and we should revisit this issue and have a longer discussion on it.
Fintan, let me, looming in the background of all of this is obviously North Dakota's corporate farming ban. We just heard the incumbent talk about property rights, and I've always struggled with our corporate farming ban because while I share your sentiment that we want to protect our state's most important industry and not see our state sold off to people who just want to use it as a hunting preserve, how do you feel about North Dakota's corporate farming ban? Why, if I'm a farmer, why shouldn't I be able to form a corporation and get capital from people who aren't my family? And to be clear, for North Dakotans, the corporate farming ban is basically you have to be a blood relative. I think, what is it, down to cousin? I think that's what it is. You have to be at least as closely related to a person as a cousin in order to form a corporation to farm with them. Do you agree with our corporate farming ban as it's written, Fintan?
Let me tell you how specifically I disagree with it. I grew up in a farmers union family. We went to farmers union meetings in Reeder, North Dakota, and Deering, North Dakota. Most specifically, I had my head turned when I went to visit the big dairy south of Mandan. North Dakota has very few dairies left. This is the sixth generation. They're milking 900 cows a day. I don't expect that the next generation wants to do it. Maybe they will, but how can that massive entity, if the family farm doesn't want to do it, how could it be continued? And I think the answer is it should be allowed to be incorporated and run like a business. I believe other advantages would accrue. One of them, they probably have more stable workers. Right now, they haul in Nicaraguans to do dairying. There's no dignity in their life. They milk 3 times a day. Their families aren't here. They get exhausted at home, and a new group comes in. If that was a corporate activity, maybe the people that do the work would bring their wives up and their children. We'd have a new group of immigrants. So I think we should be allowing corporate activity for big dairies, for big turkey and big hog operations, because if you really create something that big, you might not find someone in your family wants to do it, but some other person recognizing its income potential would. So I'm ready to be a bit of a heretic and concede we should have family opportunities to incorporate in certain areas. I don't really agree that we should have Texas-style ranches. Texas-style ranches, there are ranches in Texas bigger than entire counties in North Dakota. I'm not ready for that.
I think there's ranches in Texas that are bigger than entire states. Commissioner Goehring, your feelings about the corporate farming ban?
So I see a need in some areas to visit that and probably even change how we approach it. When it comes to our farming, cultivated land operations, yeah, they're very capital intense, but they're not as capitally intense as value-added agriculture operations or animal ag operations. We have a different set of dynamics at play here. You have different things going on. I believe the one area that should be visited, should be addressed and modified is dairy, a swine, a poultry operation. I mean, we're talking about projects that just to be economically viable, at a minimum, you're going to need $17 million and upwards of over $80 million that you're going to have to raise within the scheme of things to even have a viable operation. There was a poultry operation that wanted to come to North Dakota. This would have been about 5 or 6 years ago. And I visited with them. I looked at their operation in Iowa. They wanted to do cage-free eggs, and they were going to ship them, believe it or not, all the way from North Dakota to California every day. And it's because California is pushing animal agriculture out of their state. But it was almost $81 million at that time. I don't know what that figure would be today. It'd definitely be higher. But there's no way that one individual can do this and raise that kind of money. And then the problem is, if you're going to have economically viable operations, whether it's a feedlot, and I'm not talking about going any further than that, but a feedlot or a dairy operation, you're looking at a swine or poultry operation, those things need a lot of capital and they need some investors, and you need to have a structure in place that creates some protection or creates it's a liability issue where you can at least protect some of the resources of the rest of the farm if you're into this type of operation. There's a dairy operation in Minnesota. It was started, I wanted to say 50 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. The grandfather set it up, and before he passed away, he turned it into a corporation because he wanted to make sure that all of his grandchildren, his children, grandchildren, would all have a part in their family business. The problem is it would violate North Dakota's law because what's happened is the family continued to grow. They continued to build onto their dairy operation. And now there's something like 37 family members and their nieces, nephews, their second and third cousins, and yet they can't come to North Dakota and build a dairy because they'd be violating the anti-corporate farming law. I'm not sure we have thought about this well. I know that there is a threat or perceived threat about having that type of structure in place, but when you look across the United States of America, you really have to ask yourself, if corporate farming was a real big threat, then how come only 4% of all the farms in the United States are a corporate structure? And I think that's probably a more major question. So I do believe that at least in animal agriculture, we need to explore and entertain that thought and idea of moving towards that direction, but keep the rest of it in place for the rest of our land and farmers out here.
You mentioned keeping the rest of it in place. I'm curious. So obviously the concern about Bill Gates shows that people, whatever someone might think about the corporate farming ban, people are concerned about outsiders with big money coming into the state. You've expressed concern while at the same time talking about animal agriculture not being an issue. So for the non-animal agriculture that you said keep in place, do you think it should be strengthened in any way? The anti-corporate farming law to sort of even prevent further concerns from a Bill Gates type situation happening again?
Well, I don't think it would matter, because here's the point. Even if Bill Gates at the time was violating the law, let's say that he had a corporation that came in and purchased the land, I'm sure he's got a lot of attorneys on retainer. The next day he makes a call and he says, hey, by the way, make a transfer of that land, a new title, and I'll own it myself. And then it's not a problem. See, it's easy enough to comply. in his situation, because he's got the money, he's got the resources. All he has to do is just change the title, change who owns it, and you're no longer violating it. So I'm not sure when people talk about how do we put laws in place to prevent people from doing this, the laws are there. But it's easy enough to probably get by or move in a different direction to avoid the violation. And even if you are structured as a corporation, depending on how that corporation operates, the only thing you would be subject to if you dissolve the corporation, which could be significant for family members in a family corporation, is you would have what they consider a clawback, a depreciation, reclamation, or recapture, where whoever is now dissolving or leaving that corporation, if there was any equipment, assets, things that were acquired over that period of time that were depreciated, you would now recognize that as pure income and have a tax liability on that. So there's always ways to work around it. I'm not sure strengthening or changing the law that would violate people's property rights is really the answer to it. And even with that, I would suggest there's still a responsibility of the seller themselves. They should really think about what they're doing.
Fintan, in response to that, I'm curious. So a few of the things that Doug mentioned could probably be solved by strengthening the law. I'm not advocating this. I'm just as an example that you have to be a resident of North Dakota or have been a resident for X number of years to own a farm or property that way that's used for farming purposes. Curious what your thoughts on this issue are in terms of strengthening the laws.
Well, Federal Judge Hovland took care of your last thought. Unfortunately, you and the judge had a match on that. You lost. What I think we have to do is define an ethic for an appropriate use of our land. And I'd like to explore whether or not we can address or prohibit the use of land for pure recreation. I love hunting. I love the hike across the earth. But I deeply resent the purchase of land by people who will keep off cattle because they think flatulence is a problem. I mean, there's lots of crazy people with lots of money, and maybe that's a more fruitful area of work for protecting our farm, the dignity of producing food. Maybe I can put it that way.
I wanted to ask a question of you, Doug. One thing that I think is very exciting for the future of our state is the idea of carbon capture. And I think that's exciting for our existing industries, obviously the energy industry, but agriculture too. I interviewed the CEO of Red Trail Energy, and he was talking about the carbon capture project that they built for their ethanol facility. I think that's very interesting. One of the big projects that have come to our state, though, is the Summit Carbon Solutions. They want to build a pipeline that would bring carbon from a bunch of ethanol plants, including some here in North Dakota, bring it to North Dakota and basically bury it down underneath our earth. There's been a lot of pushback on that, particularly coming from the farming community. There's concerns about the use of eminent domain. There's concerns about easements. What are your thoughts on that pipeline? What are your thoughts on carbon capture generally?
So, carbon sequestration, carbon capture, it's been talked about for years. And there was even a carbon market that started back in 2008 that quickly blew up and dissolved. I have problems with something that people perceive as being bad or toxic. CO2 is essential for life. If you want to develop a program that actually rewards producers, farmers, and ranchers for how they utilize the landscape, the forage, develop better practices and systems to put in place, that's great because there's a benefit to the public. There's a benefit to everyone. But I have struggled just looking at the science of it, all in the name of climate change and Mother Earth, that we're going to take CO2 and pump it into the ground permanently. Keep in mind, when North Dakota started down this track years ago to seek the authority to permit a Class 6 injection well, we did it for two reasons. One was to save our power plants, to justify their existence, because there was a lot of attacks on them and people are saying they're big polluters. So fine, okay, we'll play your game. And also to recover it for enhanced oil recovery. That were the two reasons that we headed down that road. Later on, a few years ago, the whole landscape changed. People found ways to make money when they started to look at Q45, which, if you put it down permanently, was $50 a ton. Now it's been changed in recent federal legislation to $85 a ton. That isn't where we originally wanted to go with it. Now, we have some places that are taking advantage of it. I guess that's fine. They're North Dakota companies. It's North Dakota geology. My biggest concern has been, as this pipeline has been talked about and all this has been developing, I've heard from numerous landowners about various concerns, whether it's they don't feel they're getting paid enough, they don't feel that there's a genuine approach to their concerns and to their issues, that surveying isn't being done in a manner, in a way in which they can trust. Probably more so, I've heard just the fact that people feel now that they're even getting more money, they feel like they're being exploited and used. That has nothing to do with the pore space. This is all a private property land issue. And in fact, I was asked, could I intervene and bring my pipeline restoration program into play? Well, keep in mind, we developed that program with the legislature to address a constitutional issue in the oil and gas counties, which is you have a constitutional right to develop your minerals. What does happen is you don't have a right to stop a gathering line from coming from that wellhead to a midstream company who can then pick it up and take it for processing. All that may be under the guise of, yes, a constitutional right, but they still have to negotiate with the landowner. Our job was to intervene, to mediate, to help bring about a sense of order and understanding and appreciation for what everybody was dealing with, because some of these people, they don't even get the royalties. All they get is some surface damage, and there's a lot of activity, and they feel exploited. But in this situation, you have the private sector, a private sector company that's working with private landowners, and they're going to have to figure out what is the best option, what is the best route, and how do they treat people fairly. And there's a lot of things to consider out there, and there's a lot of people that are upset. There's some people saying no and hell no. There's others that are just saying, well, I need more of my concerns answered. And others feel like, you know what? There's a lot of unanswered questions in some other states with landowners. We're not so sure we want to sign on to this. So I don't know really where to go with this, other than I don't necessarily agree with putting it in the ground forever. We just don't seem to have an option unless some company wants to take less money per ton on the Q45 to use it for enhanced oil recovery. But I don't believe we're doing society or our state or the world the perceived benefit that is being suggested.
Fintan, same question to you. How do you feel about, I guess, carbon capture for our state generally and the Summit Carbon Solutions project specifically?
Well, I hope it works. I haven't seen anybody proclaiming, "Oh, this one works." I've seen so often that it isn't working, and throw more money at it. So I'm hoping it works. I don't have any money that I'll make from it, but I'd like to address the question about, is capturing carbon conceptually, is it a public use? Is it an appropriate public use? If indeed our world is heating because of our generation CO2, then it is a public use. And I can tell you that one of the cases that's already on the books in North Dakota will confirm that if it's deemed a public use, it's going to be a justification for eminent domain. And that's a case called Hilken versus Square Butte. So back when I was just starting my practice, Hilken and other farmers said it's not a public use. They cannot condemn North Dakota land to make electric power and wheel it over to Wisconsin without and Minnesota without a downstep. And the Supreme Court said, yes, they can. We're an integrated part of the economy. North Dakota has to recognize its role. So my answer is, if it is indeed deemed a public use, I think it will be. And if it will work, then what is appropriate? My answer is that with the arrival of big data, we can tell the real essential economic value of that conveyance. And I compare it to this. If you're going to haul freight from Dickinson to Fargo, and it's a 50-pound package, you have to pay less. But if you're hauling every day, not a 50, but a 500,000 package, that's a conveyance value. These farmers deserve the real conveyance value through that pipeline, and it should be attached to the land and not severable. It's a burden on the land. It's cheating to ignore that and simply pay the disturbance value of the man's cropland or ag land or his grazing lands. So I believe that there's a greed and there's an essential value in managing greed. I think we're going to have a pipeline, and I think that the main thing is to make sure that the people that are burdened with it get a payment that tells the true value of the conveyance over their land.
I'm curious, Doug, just on a different topic. And I have an interest in this just because I care about where my food comes from, as most of us should or do or should. I know that your department has worked to increase animal agriculture, meat processing in the state. I'm curious if there's anything you can commit to in your next term that you can commit to today, either through your department or advocating with the legislature to increase the support to improve access for producers to get particularly local beef into the hands of North Dakotans rather than having to import it from elsewhere. What can you do to make a change to make that better for us?
So when COVID started, there were some federal funds that were available, and I went to the legislature, actually the Emergency Commission, and I requested the use of those funds for various programs, all of which I'll say I'm very happy that the federal government saw so much value in them. They actually took them national, 4 of our programs. That's quite a testament to North Dakota and our stakeholders that we worked with. But one was the meat processing grant program, where we made some grant dollars available at a cost share to help them improve capacity or efficiency. And that program actually created 236% more capacity in North Dakota. I think that's by and large why the federal government took it and wanted to see if they could do something with it. Unfortunately, at the federal government level last year, when they took the program, they made it so complicated that you would have to hire a grant writer at $25,000 just to get a grant of $180,000 to try and improve capacity, efficiency, new equipment, different processing equipment, and that's unfortunate. I'd like to see us continue, and I will continue to engage USDA to see if they'll make changes to it. Unfortunately, it takes a while. Once that monster has it, you have to pry their fingers from the program and say, okay, now will you consider doing it this way, and this way? This is how you'll get money into every one of these communities to help support more local processing. Secondly was the charitable food organization grant. I see that as another opportunity where we helped out some of the smaller retail stores, some of our senior citizen centers, food banks, soup kitchens, where they could increase capacity by putting in freezers and to extend the shelf life of food. Freezers, storage, dehydrators, smokers, anything that would help them serve their communities better. And in fact, and I need to give proper recognition, Senator Kathy Hogan was the one that brought this to me, and we worked on it. And then we developed the framework, the guidelines, and then took that program across the state of North Dakota, and it worked fantastic. We did such a good job. The federal government took that one too, but unfortunately messed it up by doing some things that they missed the mark. They hit some things, but they missed the mark on others. I mean, those are just a few examples. Those are places that once the federal government has a program in place, it's difficult to go to the legislature and ask them for funding to continue a program, because they'll look at you a little cross-eyed and said, you know, the program's already available. People need to work through that venue. And I get that. I need to continue and working with industry, find creative ways where we can help support the ability to have more meat at the meat counter in the showcase, to have more local foods and products available. We just did a grant here recently that'll help the underserved and disadvantaged and socially disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged farmers gain market access into our communities, into our schools, into those senior citizen centers, food banks, all those different elements, so that we can help improve the bottom line for all of our farmers and ranchers.
Thanks. Fintan, just a quick follow-up for you. You mentioned obviously some corporate stuff when it comes to animal agriculture, but I'm curious, do you think there is anything more the state can do for local processors to help them, you know, establish or expand their operations when it comes to this?
Well, I think we see in this era of our lives a greater hostility for federal intrusions, and why not divert some of that energy into actually backing the feds out of certain areas which we handle responsibly. And I've, with the help of the Cattlemen's Association, begun to look into this, and it's sufficiently complex that maybe we'd be better off if Republican property-minded, small government-minded people says, "Feds, thank you, we don't need your help. Allow this endeavor of regulation be ours." I think that the federal government is really reaching too far. Crazy people who think that flatulent is got to be stopped and euthanize all the cows. I'm trying to just say that it's time to back the federal government out of here. Certain areas. That's what I'd like to try.
Fintan, well, and Doug, both of you, you promised me an hour of your time, and you gave it that. We're coming up on an hour exactly. So I want to thank you both for participating today and for answering all our questions. I really appreciate it, and good luck with your race ahead.
May I add one or 2 points?
Quickly. Well, Fintan, actually, you know what? We promised an hour. I think we need to go on. We promised an hour. We're right up against it,
right.
So I appreciate it. Certainly, you can bring those points up at a later time. We covered as much as we could. Thank you both, gentlemen, for your time today.
Thank you.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.